Well, today we're going to be looking at the Casey Anthony timeline, and I haven't seen any channel do this with the Casey Anthony story. I've gone through and I've picked apart what every single like Wikipedia biography, what every single news agency put as her sort of timeline. I've also listened to the testimony and added details from testimony to this timeline, and I've got a timeline from June 15th through to July 16th of what Casey Anthony was doing based on witness testimony, based on camera evidence. And I think what I want to do with this is really see how this stacks up to what the argument is going to be. So June 15th, Casey allegedly has an argument with parents on Father's Day. I don't know if that's consequential or not. Does that interest you in any ways as far as what happens next?
I mean, it would be hard to prove an absolute connection,
Yeah.
but I mean, listen, there's some kind of disruptive event, right? In everybody's timeline because she leaves home
Yeah.
after having been a daddy's little girl for so long. So
Yeah.
obviously something happened. And maybe that is, if we want to give Casey the benefit of the doubt in one sense and suggest that she really suffers from some kind of mental illness, those kinds of, sentinel events can, wind up triggering other breakdowns, for
Yeah.
lack of a better term. So
And I want to
it's of at least a little interest, but it would probably be hard to prove one way or the other.
I think one thing that I kind of have in my head when I watch these sort of trial based cases is, and it's a Columbo thing. And the one thing I really love, Columbo is one of my favorite superheroes, hands down. And the thing I love about Columbo is
Mhm.
a lot of the writing that goes into Columbo is based on actually sound investigative and interviewing techniques.
Right.
And one of the things Columbo says in a lot of his films, or in not, of course he's a fake person, but one of the things you hear him talk about is he's not interested in what you do every day. He's interested in when the pattern of behavior changes. So this is something I think I'm going to be focusing on for the upcoming slides, but not necessarily this one. I think it could be something, it might not be. Who knows?
Hmm. I never
So
thought
next,
about that with respect to Columbo. We should
yeah.
have an episode on Columbo someday because,
I
my
would love that.
wife pointed something out to me that's made me see the show and I always liked it, but it was like, oh, that's why the show works.
it's
Um,
it's it's genius.
it is
Um,
genius.
so June 16th. So this is where Casey essentially leaves house. So there's evidence to say that she is searching at 7:52 for shot girl costumes. 2:50, there's a search for suffocation. At 2:51, foolproof suffocation. Now there was some contesting by the defense that the data that they had, and there was some incorrect data that the forensic examiner, whoever went through the computer, said that it had 100 searches, but in the end, they could only confirm one set of searches. And there is some, George Anthony got his story either wrong or was being deceptive about when he left. I think he said he left at something like 12, or he left at 3 o'clock. So whether he was there or not is not necessarily proven. But
Hmm.
one thing he does say is the last time he sees Kaylee is he puts her in her seatbelt and in her car seat and heads off. And then this is Casey heading off to do work trips, and she's seen at 7:54 that evening in Blockbuster with her boyfriend. This is Blockbuster in Orlando.
Right. I have an important question at this point
Mm.
because honestly, in my reading in the case, either this slipped my notice or I did not come across it prior. First of all, what is a shot girl costume?
This is a very important. I think it's an important question for everybody to know the answer to. So Casey, and I'll talk about a bit of the trial that I heard because I listened to some of the shot girls being interviewed. So a shot girl, what happens is they pay something like $40 for a bottle of vodka, and they can then take that bottle of vodka, walk around the bar or the nightclub, and sell shots for $3 a shot, and they get to keep the profits between the shots that they've sold and the money. Sorry, the money they paid to buy the bottle of whiskey, let's say, and then they get to
Hmm.
keep the proceeds from the shots they sell. Now, Casey was taking a bit of a management role at this point, managing these shot girls and making sure that they were well taken care of. So this would be something that she was quite curious about,
Casey
most
was
certainly.
a manager. Oh dear.
I don't know. It's one of those things where I don't think she had an official job. I think the shot girls don't have official jobs. I think they're self-contracting, and I think the bar likes the fact that people are spending a shit ton of money on getting drunk, which means they're going to be spending more money on alcohol at the bar.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm.
But she is seen in Blockbuster. So June 16th is when people surmise she's been missing. That's when Casey says she goes to pick up her daughter, and her daughter's missing. This doesn't necessarily uh, um, cancel out any truth behind that at this stage, even though we know it's bullshit at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to the next day. So June 17th. So Brian Berner to me is an interesting character. Brian Berner is the neighbor of the Anthonys. So Brian Berner notices, and I didn't find this out. So this is why I'm interested in what people are going to think about this. So please comment if you haven't heard of any of these facts or if there's any facts that we're missing. Because I only
Mm-hmm.
was familiar with Brian Berner in the next slide, loaning Casey a shovel at one point. Now, Brian Berner, the neighbor, actually noticed Casey coming and going, potentially more than 3 times, but definitely 3 times that he can confirm. He was very nervous in his police interview that I listened to, getting this information wrong because of the gravity of the situation. And Brian Berner notices Casey backing into his garage. And it's something that the defense made the point, look, you don't watch Casey coming and going. Brian Berner, being a bit of a big dude and probably a bit sensitive about watching his neighbor's teenage daughter, is probably said, well, no, I don't watch her out of habit.
Mm-hmm.
But to him, he made it clear in the police interview that the behavior was different because the Anthonys, the mother and the father, Cindy and George, were the ones that always parked in the garage. And he noticed the behavior of Casey backing into the garage was very unique to him. The fact that she was backing in. So George and Cindy, on that same day, they notice, and Cindy tells this to her colleagues at work, that the gate to the swimming pool is open and the ladder is next to the pool. This is something that's very unusual, and the defense went to a lot of detail to show that that Kaylee could actually unlock the door to the back and could open the gate to the ladder. And she could
Mm-hmm.
get in there herself. But Cindy makes an issue to point this out at work, that that's really unusual. People were swimming in our pool.
Hmm.
So interesting. I think this is an interesting note here. Something here that may come up again.
Well, yes. So I'm just trying to put these two pieces here together. Brian Berner notices that Casey's backing into the garage, which she never. Is it that she was backing in, or is it her car was the one going in at all, or is it both?
Both. So he
Yeah.
said that it caught my eye because she's got a white car, and it really stood out that it was backing into the garage
And,
because you have to do that 3-point turn. And he said Cindy and George are the ones that normally park in. Now, one of this, I'm not going to give away one of my next piece, but he makes an argument on the next slide that he comes up as to why he thinks it's different.
mm, and does he see this open gate, or this is just George and Cindy saying this?
So George and Cindy separately on this same day, Cindy notes that the gate, when she gets home from work, the gate to the pool and the ladder are open.
And this
She,
is something that came out only at trial, correct?
yeah. So the defense are the ones that raised this. The defense made it a
Right.
point because
3 years later.
yes. So Cindy said, so in the defense, what he says, and I remember watching this just yesterday. He raised this in his opening statement because Cindy said, yeah, there was somebody swimming in our pool yesterday, and her coworkers were thinking, well, yeah, that's what you do in a pool. Why is that weird? And she made it a point to say, well, we always keep the gate down or gate shut and the ladder up. The ladder was down and the gate was open. And June 17th, as far as she was, concerned, Kaylee and Casey were off on this business trip.
But my understanding is that even that little narrative that you just presented, that none of it was either directly testified to. It was simply a suggestion made by the defense counsel in their opening remarks at the trial. And none of it was something that anybody noted at the time. It basically appeared for the first time at trial, which was a full 3 years later. Are both
Yeah.
of those things correct?
Yes, the defense actually made the point that the police didn't investigate. They were so consumed with Casey Anthony.
How could they investigate something that they didn't know was the case?
Well, this was something that they.
So and also, I don't like. I mean, if the child drowned in the pool, my thought would be, well, then the child would be there, like or somewhere in the general vicinity. I wouldn't go, oh, child's missing. I wonder if she drowned in the pool and they hid her body in the forest.
Yeah,
nice try, defense.
This is the first jump we make. the defense would probably argue, if I were playing their sort of devil's
Mhm.
advocate, that there's evidence that something out of place has happened, and nobody has
But my
investigated
point,
that.
this is my point though, that this evidence, quote unquote, that something has happened out of the ordinary is not presented until 3 years after the fact at trial. It's
Yeah,
not like the police sat down to interview the both very carefully, and Cindy right at the time said, "Well, yesterday I noticed at the pool, or I guess they don't get involved until the 30th, whatever." But like, if she had said this at the time, then there would be some reason for holding the police accountable for not investigating it. But my understanding is that nothing about this came up until the trial. And then you can't then complain, well, why didn't the police investigate this thing that I knew that they didn't and I never told them?
yeah, but what they would say, so what the defense would say is this should have been something they discovered on their own. Now,
How?
if
Oh, we
we
show up 2 weeks later?
if we separate it, so I'm playing devil's advocate. I
Yeah,
agree with you,
yeah,
but
yeah,
if the
yeah,
police
yeah.
were investigating from the point that she disappeared, a ladder being down is unusual. Now, I agree with you because that doesn't necessarily answer or even come close to answering any questions, and it's his belief that they should have been investigating how she, potentially was murdered at the point they found out, as opposed to focus all their energies on Casey. Now, I think that ignores the massive piece with Casey being deceptive to the police, taking, them on a wild goose chase and not coming clean. There's a reason they focused on Casey, and that was down to Casey at that time. But even then, if let's say there's evidence that she drowns, that still doesn't necessarily answer any questions as to innocence or guilt. It just confirms that, yeah, she may or may not have drowned, which we can't prove after we found the body.
I know we're not really into arguments here, but like this one really it gets under my skin a little bit, and I'll tell you why. So, like, imagine as a hypothetical,
Mm.
Sean, you call me up and say, Andrew, can you help me find my car keys? I haven't been able to locate them for 2 weeks, and I'm like, or 30 days even. I'm like, okay. And I ask you, I say, well, blah, 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 I start talking to you. And it turns out not only are your car keys not present, but your car's not in the garage. And I'm like, well, Sean, where's your car?
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, I loaned it to someone. And I say, who did you loan it to? And you say, Columbo. And
Yeah.
I say, really? Okay. Well, who is this Columbo? And then we drive around looking for Columbo, et cetera, et cetera. Then 3 years later, after the car's been found, thrown in a ditch, and the keys are inside of it, you say, yeah, but how come at the time, I had put the keys in my pants pocket and I'd run them through the wash, and you never told me to look in the wash? Well, no.
And I agree with you. I'm making sure I'm representing both sides as fairly as I can at this stage, because the only way we can come to a comprehensive conclusion is if we can say, yeah, that side is full of shit, and we've done our best to defend it.
Yes,
It's
yes.
for me, it's such a, there's so many things in this case. When I watch the opening argument from the defense, there's so many, it's almost like smoke and mirrors. It's like, look over here, look over here. Don't focus on the
Of
actual,
course.
evidence.
That's their job, of course.
So let's go on to June. Let's see what we have. I don't have every single day accounted for. June 18th.
Yeah.
So Casey returns to the house. Brian Berner again notices she's backing in. So this is the next day. Casey Anthony borrows a shovel from Brian Berner. So he was away on a holiday, came back just a couple of days before. Says, yeah, you can borrow a shovel. And Brian Berner testifies that Anthony had asked if she could borrow the shovel to dig up a bamboo root she had been tripping over. Now, before we have another show, I'm going to be investigating or looking into if any of the testimony says that Casey Anthony's ever done any garden work at any point in the history of the house.
Yeah.
My guess is probably not.
No.
So he noticed her car back into the garage, which was unusual to him. His parents normally back into the garage. She returned the shovel about an hour later. He said that he had told his kids to look out for Casey. She's borrowing the shovel. I'm going to get in the shower. Because normally he has a rule, don't open the door for anybody. I'll take care of that. Casey didn't say anything about her daughter missing, and at any of these arrivals and departures, he was very familiar with Kaylee. didn't see her, but said that that wasn't unusual. She's a two-door car, and when she does pull up, I can't really see in the back seats really easily. And the other thing that was noted multiple times in the police interview and at the trial, the shovel was clean, and Casey didn't look sweaty at all. So it didn't look like she'd been out digging anything up, which isn't unusual because she. I think that the body was found. It wasn't buried.
I was going to say, I'm not
yeah.
sure. It's not clear to me what she borrowed this shovel for.
It's so my guess. So my initial thought is, if let's say we're saying she's using the shovel for nefarious reasons. So let's say that we don't buy the bamboo story. She may have been thinking bury. if she's guilty. So one slant is I'll bury her, thinking, and then going, that's going to be a lot of work. And didn't use the shovel.
I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, she was just like,
God, bury her. I had to murder her. Now I got to bury her.
This is a lot of work. It's murder business. Or the truth is, she could have been digging a root out of a house that she wasn't meant to be seen at because she had told her parents she was in Jacksonville and Tampa Bay. Now, Occam's razor says that we have to look at the least path of assumption, I guess, least path of resistance. And I'm finding it hard to believe that she had a green thumb in a house that she wasn't meant to be staying at. I just find it weird that she asked for a shovel.
Yeah, I find it weird, but also inscrutable that the shovel was never used.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
that's my initial inkling, though. She wanted to use it to bury something, and then decided it was too much work.
I mean, that does sound like it would be entirely in keeping with her character. I must admit.
So June 19th, Casey Anthony goes with her boyfriend, Tony Lazar, to help look for an apartment. So she's, and this just sort of testifies, she's not necessarily looking for anything. Now, that's not contrary to the defense. She's in denial right now because of years of abuse. That's her story.
I think it's worth noting that we're on day, she left the house on the 16th?
Yeah.
And we're at 17, 18, 19. So, like, for example, the neighbor sees her pulling in. She's borrowing a shovel. She's helping her boyfriend look for an apartment, but nobody's seen the kid.
No, the kid, and she's been telling everybody else that the kid is, with Zanny or with her mother, separate of that. So if we go back a couple slides here, we can see she's arm in arm with her boyfriend, who he confirmed this is his Stefan Marbury jersey. He's from New York.
Yeah.
And this is them in Blockbuster looking quite happy. So this is her denial, according to the defense.
Mm-hmm. So
we jump ahead to the 20th. Brian Berner, neighbor, notices Casey back into the garage again for a third time. And there may have been, he said it could have been more than three. It's hard for, it's not something he necessarily notices. And it was one of those things where he called the police after she was missing, after all this business with Casey, because there was things in his mind in hindsight that were a bit funny. And then he thinks she's moving. So he made the point, I think she was moving out. Like, that was his view at the time. And it was just sort of a throwaway thought. She's moving out. The reason being she keeps backing in to the garage and she's coming and going constantly.
Yeah, that's what you would have to assume, right? Yeah. And she's the right age for that too. I mean, if you're just observing it from the outside, that would be a perfectly logical conclusion. Not she murdered her daughter, and I'm trying to right.
I mean, the defense can make an argument that he doesn't necessarily pay attention to her comings and goings, but if we go back to the Columbo mantra, you do notice the things that aren't in the ordinary. Your brain is programmed to pick up things that are different to what your expectations are. And this is one of those things that he has just been like, this is weird. And he thinks after the 20th, because he doesn't see her again, she's moved out. And that was what he thought before he went to the police. And that was what he told the police. So Casey Anthony,
I mean, all that seems I mean, the only thing that I would say is I don't know that if I were the neighbor, I don't know that I would find it all that unusual that a young 20-something is packing up, you know what I mean, from their parents' house. 20-year-olds move out of their parents' house. Functional ones, that's what they do.
and that's probably
it would stand out to me like, oh, today's the day, but it wouldn't make me think like, oh, something nefarious is going on.
Well, he doesn't, and actually, let me touch on that in a bit, but he does end up speaking to George Anthony, and there's a point where they're handing out flyers, a month later, or just to find Kaylee. But that
Mhm.
night, Casey Anthony is captured in various photos partying at Fusion nightclub and participating in a hot body contest, which she told her
Mhm.
boyfriend at the time, Tony, that she was thinking about doing. Tony, she's just hanging out around the house. According to Tony and his roommates, she was pretty much doing laundry for him and hanging around the house. She said to them she was working at Universal. She even said she'd get him tickets to, I forget what the ride was. But they did find it a bit unusual that they never saw her kids, and whenever she would speak on the phone at the apartment, she would always go outside. Which that some people do that anyway. It's private stuff. It's with my mother. It's about my kid. But they just sort of said, okay, well, it's none of our business. I'm sure everything's fine. You would never assume that this lovely person next to you is covering up a murder, and
Right.
she's been cleared of that. So Casey was overseeing Shot Girls at Fusion nightclub, which we did talk about. June 21st. Have you seen the diary that she wrote?
I think I've seen parts of it. I don't know if I've seen this entry.
So June 21st, I'll read this. I have no regrets, just a bit worried. I just want for everything to work okay. I completely trust my own judgment. I know that I made the right decision. So I'm just going to finish reading this for anybody who hasn't seen it. I just hope that the end justifies the means. I just want to know what the future will hold for me. I guess I will soon see. This is the happiest that I've been in a very long time. I hope that my happiness will continue to grow. I've made new friends that I really like. I've surrounded myself with good people. I'm finally happy. Let's just hope that it doesn't change. And this is June 21st.
Yeah, I don't think that has any evidentiary value either way. I mean, because obviously, after the fact, you can read a lot into it, but she's careful if she is obviously referring to anything having to do with her daughter not to write it down. And so, this could just as easily be, I have no regrets about leaving my parents' house. You know what I mean? Like, there's just nothing to it.
Yeah, I do think, though, the one thing I've noted from it, though, is I'm trying to figure out if she's smart enough to know that if she gets caught, somebody's going to read this. Because in your diary, you're not normally vague. And she's worded this to me in a way that is very careful. It's almost like she's wording it to say what she wants to say, so only she understands it.
You have a point there. I was kind of noticing. But again, I mean, that to me cuts both ways in that, on the one hand, I completely agree with you. On the other hand, I think that we think that because of what happened next. If it were just a page of someone's diary and it was just, Casey Anthony, 20-something chick who moved out of her parents' house, would this strike us as odd?
I think it depends on what her baseline is for writing a diary note, but that's it. It was just something that occurred to me. I wanted to share with you. I agree. From an evidence perspective, it's maybe notable at best, but it doesn't convince anybody anything's happened in particular. You can take this out of context and attach it to any sort of meaning, any sort of.
And for our listeners, I probably should not have used the word chick. I apologize.
Oh yeah,
yes,
Andrew. We are quite modern men here on this show.
That's right. No, I mean, really, I should. I should have. I'm not even trying to make light of it. A young woman.
We've graduated from the Murder She Wrote, Hey Lady, to then bitches, to chicks, to birds. Now we're just going to go with young lady. No, not young lady. What should we say?
Young woman.
Young woman. That's right. Lady is. If you ever watch, anybody who ever watches Murder She Wrote, in every episode, somebody says in a very derogatory way to Jessica, "Listen, lady."
Yeah.
Listen. Every single episode, my wife picks up on it. It's like, listen, you stupid piece of shit.
I was. We watched Murder She Wrote growing up in my house. My parents watched it every Sunday night, and till the point that I got bored of it. I was like, I can't do this anymore, and I ended up watching Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. But
Nick and I watch Murder She Wrote every dinner now. Every night at dinner time, we have it on.
As an adult, I've gone back and watched a few episodes, and the thing, and we could talk about that. So we have a Columbo / Murder She Wrote episode. That'd be fun. But one of the things that strikes me, like just generally, is that I was watching an episode with my wife. I'm like, this is like my Aunt Kathy running around solving mysteries. When I was a kid, she was like this old lady, but now she's like, actually, my Aunt Kathy's probably older than Jessica Fletcher was at the time.
We need to have a Murder She Wrote episode. There's so many questions about Jessica and the number of murders she's been associated with.
Yes,
Hundreds.
yes. Too many.
Yeah. So that's Jessica Fletcher. That's a
We're
good,
coming for you, Jessica. But yeah, we're on the case here.
That's a reasonable doubt case if I've ever heard one. So June 23rd, Casey calls her boyfriend after running out of gas. Tony testifies, yes, where are you? I need some gas. So Casey Anthony and her boyfriend, Tony Lazaro, break into a shed at the Anthony's home to borrow her father's gas can. So she even says, I don't have a key. Asks Tony to he gets his tire iron, and he's like, are you sure? When I've been listening to Tony's testimony, he seems like a really sound guy.
Yes, I everything. He loved the kid.
Yeah,
as I understand it, and I believe him. Like when you see him, like I think he's pretty traumatized by what happened.
He comes across really well in testimony, but he says, "Fine, okay, break it," and they borrow her father's gas cans on the 23rd. Okay, and then June 24th, Casey Anthony gets into a fight with George Anthony about the busted shed and stolen gas cans. She storms out of the home, if we go on to the next
now, can I ask a question about that? Other than Casey and George, is there anybody who testifies to that fight? Does that strictly the two of them say that's what happened?
It's just the two of them and the defense, because I believe on one of the slides going ahead, we'll come back to that when I move to the slide, but I believe what the defense said at one point in their opening statement was George never mentions his fight with his daughter when he speaks to the police about somebody breaking into a shed, because he even tells the neighbor that somebody's broken into my shed. Now, I don't know the timeline in comparison to when Casey was there about the stolen gas cans, but if they fought about it, obviously she's made it clear that she was the one who borrowed them.
Yes.
So June 25th, cell phone records show she was in the area of her parents' home. Not really anything of note outside of, I guess you're trying to determine if she's involved in burying the body. The body was just buried around the corner. It was stashed around the corner.
Yeah, no.
And then June 28th, Casey's. Now, this is I'll be honest. I don't know whether this is the 27th or 28th because I've heard it reported as 2 different days. Casey Anthony's car is towed from the parking lot of a check cashing store after a supervisor calls to report it abandoned. We all know that she is a felon because she stole her friend's checkbook and was writing checks all over the place to Winn-Dixie, but I'm sure she was cashing some checks as well at the check cashing place.
When was the last time we know Casey Anthony to have been using that car? Was that the 18th or 19th?
I don't know who's seen. I know that if we go back,
she was backing into her garage.
I think it was being used as late as the 24th because her boyfriend.
This strikes me as a little odd, right? That 24th, 25th, and now on the 28th
is when.
I mean, if a car's been parked in a parking lot for 4 days, is it abandoned?
Well, I think it's only been there for a few. Well, it was an abandoned car, so it was there. This is what I'm not sure of the timeline as far as when they reported it, whether it was 48 hours, 2 days, overnight, whatever. I think a private business, if a car's been parked there for more than one night, will say, "Get this thing out of here."
I mean, that is true. But I guess to my mind, there's a little bit of a difference between saying this guy's parked here is using this spot as like their personal spot and that's illegal and goodbye, or they're not allowed to do that, versus the car abandoned has a very, I believe you may have had a car that was left abandoned by the side of the road.
Yes.